You keep on blessing me.
You keep on blessing me.
Every day.
Every day.
Fight on my battle.
Fight on my battle.
You say today.
Welcome back to Sacred and Satisfied. I'm Dr. Belinda Newkirk. And for the last 4 episodes, if you joined me, we were discussing acknowledging sexual hurts from saved people when the hurt, the wound, or the trauma came from the church. If you missed it, you need to go back and get caught up. Okay? But today, we're talking about something many of us learned before we ever understood sex itself. Gender roles, okay? The unspoken rules, unequal expectations, and messages that shape how men and women believe sex should work. All right. So this episode is called Gender Roles in Sex, the Male versus Female Belief. Gender roles in sex, the male versus female belief. And I want to say this up front now. Many of us didn't learn God's design for sex. We didn't learn it. What we learned was our culture's version dressed up in religion. That's what we learned. Our culture's version dressed up in religion. Now, we're going to start by looking at how gender roles shape sexual beliefs early. And we're going to start by looking at how today's society, in today's society, the church, among other theologians, also pushed the purity culture. I know you've heard about purity culture. It creates a dynamic where sex isn't a shared gift, but a transaction or a chore. That's what it does. Now, for many women, this results in sexual shutdown, where they find it impossible to flip the switch from sex is bad or dangerous because of the purity culture now to sex is a fun, holy reunion on their wedding night. They fail to be able to switch or change up. So beliefs about sex often begin in households where gender roles are clearly defined but rarely explained. Now, this means that children don't learn about sex from talk. They won't talk to about it. They learn about it by watching how mom and dad treat each other. Okay? The unspoken words. When roles are strictly enforced, but never explained. Now, children fill in the blanks in their own way, often fearful conclusions that they come up with, or from peers or from media. They come up with their own conclusions about what sex should be. And it's called the unspoken blueprint. It's like I like to call it the unspoken blueprint. Because in many traditional homes, there's a blueprint how men and women should act. Because sex is a sensitive topic now, parents often rely on those roles to imply how intimacy should work instead of talking about it openly. They do. They imply. They don't want to talk about it openly. Now let's break it down. The cultural messages versus reality, okay? Let's talk about how young girls and young women were often taught. Now, one of the messages, go through a list of them, is protect yourself. They got the little young girls or young women are taught protect yourself, the burden of prevention. That's what they are. The message is that girls were taught that they are the gatekeepers of male morality. Now, if a man has a lustful thought or crosses a line, they looking at it's the woman's fault. What was she wearing or how was she acting or behaving? So an example of that would be like a teenage girl is pulled aside at a youth group and told her leggings are causing a problem or it's a stumbling block for boys. So she learns to view her body as a problem or like a landmine that could go off and hurt someone else now rather than a beautiful part of her identity. Okay? Another message that young girls or young women are taught is that don't tempt boys. Value is linked to your purity. Here we go again. So the message is that a woman's or young girl's worth is like a clean sheet of paper. So once it's used, if you take a clean sheet of paper and ball it up and try to straighten it back out, you and I both know you ain't never getting the wrinkles back out that paper. So the message to a young girl or a young woman is that she is permanently damaged. Or she's less valuable to God than her future husband because it's been used, it's been damaged, she's not pure. So an example would be a woman who was sexually active before marriage, who may have children outside of marriage, or was a victim of abuse that we talked about last episode. And then she enters into her marriage feeling like damaged goods. So even if her husband is kind and compassionate towards her, she feels she has no value to offer because she was taught that her worth was a physical status rather than a spiritual identity. Yes, I said that. She was taught that her worth was a physical status rather than a spiritual identity. So your value is in purity is another thing that they were taught. Sex as a transaction. So the message is that you use your body to buy security. You don't have to like it, but you have to do it to keep a man happy and prevent him from leaving or straying. So if a man try to get ready to think of what you don't do, another woman will. That's the message that young girls or women or young women are taught early. So a wife who may be exhausted or emotionally hurt still says yes to sex because she fears that if she doesn't, her husband will become angry or look at pornography or seek sex elsewhere. So she's trading her body for peace in the house, which truly kills her true intimacy because that's what she feels her duty, her obligation. So sex as a transaction is what she learned. Another thing that young girls are taught or young women is that desire makes you unrespectable. The duty mindset. Sex is like a command. So the message is inside of marriage, a woman's body belongs to her husband. Therefore, her own pleasure, comfort, or no doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's taken off the table. So the example would be a woman is in a traditional household believes that refusing her husband is a sin. She endures sex. She don't enjoy it. She endure it like a duty while staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to be over. Because mutuality wasn't taught. She doesn't realize that God intended for her to be an active, enjoying participant. Because she wasn't taught that she was supposed to be a willing, active participant in this. The unspoken message is that it's okay to give sex to keep affection or protection, but not to enjoy it. That's what women are taught. Young girls were taught. It's okay to give sex to keep affection or protection, but it's not meant for you to enjoy it. For some women, especially in older, traditional Christian households now, the message was even clearer. Wait until marriage. And when you're married, sex is your duty. I know that's pretty much what I was thinking when I was young. You got to wait until you get married. And when you do get married, sex is your duty to your husband. You supposed to do. Well, he won't. Sex wasn't discussed. Pleasure wasn't discussed. Mutuality certainly wasn't taught. And consent inside marriage wasn't spoken of, wasn't even named. It wasn't even a thing. I'll say that again. Pleasure wasn't discussed. Sex wasn't discussed. Mutuality wasn't taught. And consent inside marriage wasn't discussed or wasn't talked about or wasn't even named. Sex became something done to women, not with them. That's what happened. And now let's look at what boys were taught and what was excused, okay? Now, many boys receive a different message from girls. We know that. So what they share in common is that as a young man or a young boy, they were taught ideas about and practices about masculinity. Now, that emphasized the emphasis was on that superiority of masculinity over femininity, and the authority, that meaning the authority over men over women. So growing up, boys and young men got the message very different from many different sources about what a real man should be, do, and look like. Okay? So in most societies, the dominant message about what a real man is still the emphasis of the superiority of masculinity over femininity and the authority of men over women. So what it looks like in a family is this: don't cry, suck it up, take it on your chest. You got to protect your sister. This is what boys are taught as young. They go to school, study hard to get a good job. You need to provide for your family. Boys are good at science, girls are not. Meaning you got to make something happen. You got to be able to take care of that woman and her body. And then they look at their peers and what other boys are telling them. Girls like a man to be in control, man. Show her who's the boss. Don't get tied down to one woman. A real man has many girlfriends. Young boys, young men are also taught that, through social media, and everywhere else, television shows, that women, they like children. They need a strong man to protect them. You need to be a real man to get the good things in life, like money, power, and sex. So young boys are taught, and young men are taught totally different than young girls. They were also taught, directly or indirectly, desire is uncontrollable. Boys will be boys. Now this suggests that once a man is turned on to them, his brain shuts off and he can't stop himself. That's what it does. So an example is, it's like a guy makes a rude comment to a woman walking by her and says, I couldn't help it, she looked too good. It treats men like they have no steering power, they have no control. They were also taught, directly or indirectly, that men need sex. We heard that all the time. They need it, gotta have it. Sex is a biological hunger rather than a choice, is what they put it out there as. So it frames sex like water or air for a man or a young boy. Now, if a man doesn't get it, he'll suffer or become unstable. Really. So a partner or a person in a marriage feels guilty for saying no because they believe that their husband needs it for his mental health or to stay faithful, rather than it being a shared activity for fun or connection. And the truth be told, most women typically enjoy sex in marriage, more than men. They're more sexually active and aggressive in getting it more than men. But men were taught, directly or indirectly, that this is what they should be expecting or acting like. They're also taught that women are responsible for managing men's urges. Now, it's on the woman to set the boundaries. She got to dress modestly and keep men in line. And if a man acts out, it's because the woman didn't gatekeep well enough, putting the responsibility on the woman. So example, for a young guy in school, it's a school dress code that bans leggings for girls so it doesn't distract the boys. So what it's suggesting is that boys can't be expected to focus or stay in control. So girls must change their clothes to help them. That's what it suggests. Another thing that said that for young men or young boys is that sexual conquest equals masculinity. So sex is like a scoreboard to them. The more women a man sleeps with, the more manly he is. It turns intimacy into a game of winning and losing. That's what it turns sex into. A game of winning and losing. So a group of boys high-fiving each other for a one-night stand, but mocking a friend who is married and has only one partner. So it measures worth by the notches in their belt, or how many they can snag and bag, so to speak, rather than character. So in most environments, boys were excused for behaviors girls were punished for. Sleeping around was minimized. Lack of self-control was normalized. And women's pleasures was optional, or is optional. Now, this faulty belief system taught boys, I have a right to sex, even if she doesn't enjoy it. But scripture, and let's go to the Bible now, it never supports entitlement. It never supports entitlement. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3 through 4 in the New Living Translation. It says, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Bottom line, it tells us that intimacy in marriage is mutual, not one-sided. Sex was never designed as dominance. It was never designed as dominance. It was designed as connection. The mutual responsibility of both. Sex in marriage isn't a favor one person does for the other. It is a mutual obligation where both partners should care about the other's sexual satisfaction and needs. Marriage is a partnership of equals where both people agree to prioritize and take care of each other's physical and emotional, sexual, and intimate needs. If you look at Matthew, let's turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 28 says, Jesus places the responsibility of self-control squarely on the individual, reminding us that we are each called to honor others with our hearts and minds. That's what it's mutual responsibility of self-control. Okay? Let's reflect on our affirmation for today. And we're going to keep this affirmation because this is part one of us talking about the the male versus the female thoughts, the gender roles that shape the sexual beliefs. That's early on. So this is part one of it. And our affirmation for today is that let's say, repeat after me. I release false gender-based beliefs about sex and embrace God's design for mutual respect, shared pleasure, healing, and holy intimacy, free from shame, control, or entitlement. I'll say it again. The affirmation for today is I release false gender-based beliefs about sex and embrace God's design for mutual respect, shared pleasure, healing, and holy intimacy, free from shame, control, or entitlement. Okay? And let's look at the reflection question. Reflection question for the week is, what gender-based messages about sex did you absorb growing up, and how have they influenced your expectations or discomfort today? Okay? What gender-based messages about sex did you absorb growing up, and how have they influenced your expectations or discomfort today? All right? Now remember, true masculinity isn't found in conquest, and true femininity isn't found in managing someone else's behavior. No, it's not. And as we wrap up today, let's remember that the script we've been handed from early on, that men or young boys are slaves to their urges, or that women are the gatekeeper of morality, don't just hurt our relationships. They fall short of the dignity God has for us, okay? So I want you to join us next time as we continue to shine a light on the truth that sets us free to enjoy love and sex within marriage. This is Sacred and Satisfied. I'm Dr. Belinda Newkirk, and I'll see you next time.
Baby,